We're getting closer to the NFL draft, and on today's LockedOn Giants podcast, we hear from Pro Football Focus draft analyst Austin Gayle. That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Chena, and today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you in part by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the games start. And on today's episode, my special guest is Austin Gayle. He is a draft analyst over at Pro Football Focus. Austin came on the program with me to talk about his mock draft, to talk about the upcoming NFL draft, which is less than 3 weeks away. It's coming up really quickly. So a really good discussion with Austin Gayle as we inch closer to the NFL draft, trying to get different opinions on the show for you. And I hope you enjoy this particular interview with Austin Gayle that's coming up right now. I am pleased to welcome in Pro Football Focus's Director of Content, Austin Gayle. Austin is a co-host on The Tailgate, but is also host of a really special project that's coming out in April. It's called Hutch, and it's a 4-episode podcast series with the projected number 1 overall pick in this year's draft, Aiden Hutchinson. So be sure to check that out. It's called Hutch, and it's available wherever you get your podcasts. And Austin, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast with me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate you. Now, Austin, you have a mock draft out for Pro Football Focus, which we're going to talk about in just a bit. But before we do, Austin, I want to get your overall impressions of this year's draft, where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are. I mean, overall, it seems like it's a strong draft across the board, but some positions stronger than others. Where do you see those?
Yeah, I think the obvious weakness in this year's draft, and I think it's been talked about ad nauseum, is the quarterback position, right? I think when you have a poor quarterback class, it can drag the overall value of a class down because that's the most valuable position. And oftentimes every single draft we're looking for quarterbacks to go inside the top 5, inside the top 10 to start as rookies and really like move the league forward. I don't think we have that group in this year's draft. I think that drags the overall value down. I also don't think it's a good running back draft. I don't think I would draft any of these guys in rounds 1 or 2. I know some of them are getting mocked at the back end of round 1, but I don't really see a ton of value in taking, say, Kenneth Walker of Michigan State or Breece Hall of Iowa State in round 2 or round 1, when there are a lot of other complementary backs that are available in this class, probably on late day 2, early day 3. So I don't think it's good at quarterback. I don't think it's good at running back. I think interior offensive line, offensive tackle is solid. I think there is a drop off at offensive tackle after the first 4 or 5 guys. First 4 or 5 guys are off the board, but that's usually what it is with the offensive tackle class. As for where it's good, edge, it's a really good edge group. I think it's a very solid wide receiver group. I don't think there's a lot of eliteness in this receiver group, but there is a lot of deepness, and it's a very complete group with a lot of different skill sets. So receiver, edge, the top end of the offensive tackle class is, I think, where this group will lean, and even the top end of the cornerback class, right? Derek Stingley Jr. of LSU, Ahmad Gardner of Cincinnati, the 2 Washington corners, and Trent McDuffie and Kyler Gordon. Then you have Andrew Booth Jr. of Clemson, Kyrie Elam of Florida. A lot of top 50 considerations in that group.
Now, excuse me, a term we hear a lot is positional value. That term seems to be thrown around more this year than I can remember in years past. Have you heard that term used a lot in the NFL circles? And does it mean anything in the grand scheme of things, or is that just a fancy term that the media and fans have come up with?
I definitely think it means something, right? And I think the best way I describe it, because PFF, we talk about positional value consistently in free agency. We talk about positional value in the draft, obviously. And then for the same reason, say you think a punter, say Matt Ariza of San Diego State's the best player in the draft, you're not taking him number 1 overall because of positional value, right? Because punters are not as valuable as other positions. And you could speak to how valuable is this position versus this position on the football field. But I think where we really do see legitimate cases of positional value is in free agency and in the open market. Interior offensive linemen are not paid as much as offensive tackles on the open market. Quarterbacks are the highest paid position. Then it goes edge, offensive tackle, receiver, corner. The lowest paid positions in the NFL, non-punter, non-kicker positions are safety, off-ball linebacker, interior defensive line, a lot of those other, or center, guard. Those are the lowest paid positions in the NFL. Those are low on the positional value chart, right? You can get the highest paid center in the NFL, the best center theoretically on the second contract. For the same amount of money, you could pay a top 20 offensive tackle, right? 25 offensive tackle. That's where positional value really shows up. So how that affects the draft is you need to be capitalizing on positional value with your high-end picks, right? If you have a top 5, top 10 caliber offensive tackle on a rookie contract, that saves you so much more surplus value than when you do sign other players in free agency. That's why we consider interior defensive line, specifically run stopping, two gap and type of defensive tackles, interior offensive line, off-ball linebacker, running back. These are positions because they cost so low on the open market, you should be investing middle to late round picks in those positions. So you're not, losing some of the surplus value. Now, are there some players at those low value positions that exceed expectations to a point where they could be considered top 20, 32 picks? That's Kyle Hamilton of Notre Dame. At safety, that's Tyler Linderbaum, the center from Iowa. There are certain players that are so good that you're willing to kind of move past some of that positional value stuff. But position value, very much real. And I think every team sees that really in free agency.
All right. We talk about positional value. We talk about grades. And not all grades are equal, at least I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you, as somebody who puts together a big board, and I say not all grades are considered equal because obviously a quarterback's going to have a different set of skills than an edge rusher and so on and so forth. So in putting together your big board, I'm just kind of curious what criteria you use to say, I'm going to put Evan Neal ahead of, say, for example, Malik Willis.
Yeah. I think, it's a great question. I think everyone's process is different. I do think that for PFF specifically and for myself, I do factor in positional value significantly into building out a big board, right? If I think a punter is the best player in the class, I'm not going to put him number 1 overall on my big board, right? And I think the other piece of that, I think, is a film grade. And it depends on the certain position. For quarterbacks, you're looking for how he handles pressure. How accurate is he? What's his arm talent? Can he put the deep ball? Can he hit the intermediate level of the field? What offense was he in? And you take all these composite factors for a certain position and you put together a film grade. And I also think that it's important to highlight a production grade, right? How many passing yards did he have? How was he, what was his efficiency on third down? There's different data points that you can kind of collect to put together a production grade, especially an opponent adjusted production grade, which is largely what PFF grades are, right? PFF grades are largely production grades. They don't speak to a player's athleticism or ability to read the field like film grades do and athleticism grades do. It's more of a production based score. So then I obviously hinted at it, but then there's an athleticism component, right? What is his measurables? What are his size, height, weight, speed, change of direction, all those athletic testing numbers come into it. And then at the end of it, you kind of have this composite score, right? Factoring in positional value, how good's his film, how good was his production, opponent adjusted production, how good's his athletic testing. Combine that together for a composite score to really push him into a certain slot on the board.
All right. Thank you for explaining that, because I always wondered how people put together their big boards and, what puts this position ahead of this position and whatnot. Let's talk, before we get to your mock draft, I want to ask you about some sleepers because, they're obviously every year the media and the fans, they focus on the big names. And then there's the NFL draft community. They tend to focus on a different group, which, we define as sleepers. I want to get your take on some of the names that maybe aren't getting as much mention or as much love, if you will, that are names that we should probably be keeping an eye on that could surprise in the first 2 rounds, for example.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, it gets harder and harder to identify sleepers, right? As we kind of progress forward and the combine goes underway, I think it's easier earlier in the process, but some guys that I am higher on than say maybe the consensus right in that middle tier range. I think Nick Bonito, the Oklahoma edge defender, tested really well. I like the athletic testing. He's got good production. He's got good size. And there maybe are some concerns with some of his measurables, but he has good size, good production. I think Nick Bonito is going to be a guy on day 2 that teams are really impressed with and get good production out of it. Travis Jones, the UConn defensive tackle, I think could go as high as the back end of round 1, if not firmly a day 2 player. I think he's another one that the team that selects him, if they do get him on day 2, is getting, in my opinion, a steal. I think he's a really productive player, and I think he immediately comes in and can be the number 2 like nose tackle type in this class behind Jordan Davis. Also a big fan of Kingsley Enagbare, South Carolina edge that doesn't have the juice on tape. He's also an older prospect, but super productive in the SEC. And I think you can kind of project him as this high floor player in the NFL. Some other ones, Jaquan Brisker, safety at Penn State. No one's talking about the safety class after Kyle Hamilton of Notre Dame, Lewis Cine of Georgia, and then Jalen Petrie of Baylor. I think Jaquan Brisker is a legitimate talent that getting him on day 2, I think you can get a starting caliber safety at that position. Off-ball linebacker, I'm a huge fan of Darian Beavers. Darian Beavers has really good size for the position, could do a lot of different things if you ask him. And I think he's improved over the course of his career there at the University of Cincinnati as a coverage player as well. Those are just a handful of the guys that I do really like that I think you can get on day 2 and still feel like you have a legitimate starter.
All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast with special guests Austin Gayle of Pro Football Focus. We're talking draft with him. But first, if you're tired of dealing with low energy, poor gut health, or just having to take supplement after supplement, you need to check out AG1 by Athletic Greens. With one delicious and easy to mix scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens that benefit you from head to toe. It's perfect for any diet plan, and AG1 is a super affordable product at just less than $3 per day. Act Now and Athletic Greens, the makers of AG1, will give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Visit athleticgreens.com/NFL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NFL Network to take ownership of your health and to pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, there's only one place that offers the best information for the latest odds, contests, and player props for all your sport betting need, and that is betonline.net. From basketball to baseball, hockey, UFC, boxing, the upcoming Triple Crown, you name it, betonline.net has you covered. BetOnline.net is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head on over to their website today and learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So I want to talk about your mock draft, and it is on Pro Football Focus. It is available as part of the amount of free content, and you guys put out a lot of great free content for those who aren't familiar with the site. And I'll put a link in the show notes for anybody who wants to check this out. But you have for the Giants, spoiler alert, by the way, you have for the Giants Evan Neal from Alabama going to the Giants at number 5, which I think everybody would sign up for if that were the case. And then you have Trayvon Walker from Georgia going to the Giants at 7. Just want to get your take on that 7th overall pick. I mean, Neal, I think we can all agree the Giants need a tackle. Walker, I got to admit, I was a little surprised with that pick, even though, Walker's an outstanding prospect, and you just saying, that the edge class is kind of deep. I'm just kind of wondering, what was the thought process there?
Yeah, so I do think with Neal to start, I think it's a slam dunk if they get any of, Ike Ekwonu, Charles Cross, or Evan Neal in this class, either at that 5 spot or that 7 spot in the top 10. I think working opposite of Andrew Thomas with a, I think blue chip offensive tackle prospect like one of those 3 players, I think is a huge win. And then for the other pick, right, whether it's 7, whether it's 5, who knows, I do think that they should invest in the edge position. I know they have Quincy Roche that they want to develop. I know they have obviously Azeez Ojulari, who is a former 2nd-round pick in 2021, but I think they can get better there, especially if Trayvon Walker, who doesn't have maybe the production that you want, right? But when you look at the role and the scheme that he played in there at Georgia, he was not able to pin his ears back and get a lot of one-on-one opportunities on the true edge spot like Aiden Hutchinson of Michigan or Kayvon Thibodeau of Oregon, where I really do think he's a top 10 player. And his athleticism, his size, athleticism combination is really rare. I don't think we'll see another similarly sized and athletic player for the next 3 to 5 years. Like that's how different he is as an athlete. He's a little bit of an older prospect, but I am buying into this hype around Trayvon Walker as a legitimate edge talent if properly positioned, right, and able to pin his ears back. They're at Georgia. They really do prioritize run defense. They put guys ahead up or inside the opposite tackles that could honestly play on the edge and pin, like I said, rush the passer in a more pure one-on-one situation. So Trayvon Walker or Kayvon Thibodeau are the two players that I do like the Giants to take as well. I think if they go offensive tackle and edge, one of the big three, Charles Cross, Ike Ekwonu, Evan Neal, and then one of Kayvon Thibodeau Kayvon Thibodeau or Trayvon Walker. I think that's such a massive improvement. And you speak to positional value, right? Highest paid players in the NFL are quarterbacks. After that, it's edge and then offensive tackle. You're getting highly premium positions in the top 10, guys with really good athleticism, good projectable traits. I think that's the slam dunk scenario, in my opinion, for the Giants with 5 and 7.
How much does this change, though, if the Giants are successful in moving James Bradberry?
So if they are successful in moving James Bradberry, they could consider Ahmad Gardner at one of those spots, right? They also could consider Derek Stingley Jr. of LSU. I still think at 5 and 7, I value Walker and Thibodeau over either of those corners, and I also value offensive tackle over either of those corners. I think they're really good players. I think they're top 10, top 12 players, but at 5 and 7, if you have an opportunity to go get, like I said, Evan Neal or Thibodeau or Walker, so if those two are off the board and you're not able to get them, then maybe you start to look at cornerback if they move on from Bradberry. But I really do think that investing in the trenches with those high-end picks, really high-end capital, is the way to go.
Yeah, they definitely need some help in the trenches, especially after losing some guys. And, we all know the offensive line situation. That hasn't been very favorable. I think Pro Football Focus has had the Giants' offensive line ranked at or near the bottom for like at least the last 2 years, maybe even longer. Mm-hmm. So definitely. Now, here's an interesting thing. This point was kind of brought up to me on my Twitter feed. I want to get your take on this. People feel that, the Giants invested in 2020 in 3 offensive linemen: Andrew Thomas, Shane Lemieux, Matt Peart. Matt Peart this year probably is not going to play because he suffered that late season injury. So some people are like, well, why would you want to invest more? Obviously they need a right tackle, but why would you want to go beyond investing in a right tackle? Because now you're going to have an overload on the offensive line. You're going to be devoting too many resources, if you will, to the offensive line. I don't necessarily buy that argument. I'm of the opinion that if it's a good player and they just so happen to be from one position group, just stock up because, injuries happen and guys come, they go, and so on and so forth. What's your take on overloading in the draft at a particular position for a single team?
I really don't think they'd be overloading in this scenario, right? I know they have Andrew Thomas, the 2020 first rounder, and Matt Peart out of UConn, the 2020 third rounder. But I think beyond that, Nate Solder's not walking through that door. They really have a good glaring hole at right tackle unless they are planning to start Peart at that spot. I think it's not overloading. I think it's filling a need, right? And I don't think, again, people always bring up, oh, they can't draft a receiver. They drafted a receiver last year. They can't draft a tackle. They drafted a tackle last year. You should be consistently, if you're drafting in the top 10, you should be consistently prioritizing the same core positions, right? Pass rusher, offensive tackle, quarterback, receiver, corner. Like you're not changing it up just because you drafted that same certain position the year before. If you're still drafting in the top 10, right? It means that you're not truly exceeding expectations or winning with your premier positions. And I honestly think it wouldn't be surprising if the Giants went receiver, right? Yeah, they have Galladay, Toney, Shepard, but if they wanted to get a legitimate upgrade, say Drake London there at 7 and have him play over Kadarius Toney and move him into the slot, like that's an option too, right? They're trying to get elite at these high value positions. I prefer going off the tackle and pass rusher, but I think it's wrong to look at the decision, say they do go off with the tackle in the draft as overloading at a position or double dipping or whatever it is. I think it's right to continue to prioritize, one of the most important positions in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And actually, in one of my very earliest drafts this year, I actually had a receiver that I picked for pick number 7, and I got slammed for it because my thinking was, look, Toney, we still don't know what they're going to have in him. Shepard, I was shocked that they brought him back. I mean, I can't imagine he's going to be on this team beyond this year. And Darius Slayton just has tailed off. So I said, look, if they're going to run a lot of 11 personnel, why not get another receiver? I mean, that was my thinking there, but I got slammed for that. So But all right, let me ask you about, speaking of 11 personnel and so forth, tight end. That's another position that the Giants are just totally redoing. Now, the tight end class this year doesn't have any true studs like a Kyle Pitts or maybe even a Pat Fryermuth. What is your take on the tight end class? Are there, excuse me, are there enough good players in that group that you think can fit the Giants and what Brian Dable's offense we think, obviously we haven't seen it or how much it's going to change, but do you think they have guys in that draft that will fit what potentially they might do?
I do think that the tight end class isn't great. I don't think I'm drafting even Trey McBride, who is kind of viewed as one of the top tight ends in this class before round 3. Now, are there players that they could come in? I think I like Jeremy Ruckert, the Ohio State tight end that maybe you draft on, in round 3 or round 4 to come in and play for them. I think Wyermeyer, the Texas A&M tight end, is going to fall quite a bit with the pro day that he had. I think you could look elsewhere, like Greg Dulcich of UCLA, the Nevada tight end. I think his name is Turner, Cole Turner. I think that's another player you could invest in. But that, in my opinion, if you are looking to invest in the tight end position, someone you're looking to start in 2022, I think you're often better going for a veteran, especially in this class.
Yeah, and of course the Giants just added Ricky Seals-Jones, who's not really a tight end one. Interesting thing about Ricky Seals-Jones is he was a receiver in college, if I'm not mistaken. So not really, a tight end number one, but a stopgap solution, which is what the Giants have done a lot of in free agency, added stopgap solutions. So let's talk about, let's go back to the offensive line, because even though the Giants added a lot of offensive linemen, a lot of them are on one-year deals. So that to me says because they've added a lot of interior guys, offensive tackle, definitely. I mean, we can all agree that's going to probably be, if not the top priority, one of. But that being said, center, maybe a young center, maybe a young guard, just to get guys in the pipeline, because the pipeline dried up for them last year. Who are some of these day 2, day 3 prospects at center and guard, or, that you feel are guys that could be Giant fits?
Yeah, I actually do like the depth of this interior offensive line class. I don't think Zion Johnson, Tyler Linderbaum make it to day 2, but others that I do like, Dylan Parham is a guard out of Memphis that probably plays center in the NFL that I think will be worth a day 2 investment. Donovan West, very similar. Cole Strange of Chattanooga, Luke Fortner of Kentucky. I also think, looking more at day 3, Marquise Hayes of Oklahoma, Lacia Smith, Virginia Tech. There are starters, I think, in this interior offensive line class on day 2, day 3. It will take some development, right? Not a lot of there's a reason they're falling that far, but I think Alec Lindstrom, Boston College, Luke Wattenberg of Washington are other interior offensive line prospects that you can legitimately look at as potential starters in the NFL that should be available outside the top 50, top 60 picks. I think another player too, that I don't think plays tackle in the NFL despite playing tackle in the SEC, is Darian Kennard of Kentucky, who I think could be a day 2 player that could be an immediate starter right there at guard. I think he's another player that I'm high on specifically. I think he's a top of round 3, type of guy that you can come in and ask to start at guard right away.
All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, Built Bar is a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but without the calories and the sugar. Most Built Bars contain about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And they taste like a candy bar. Yes, they do. When I'm looking for a sweet treat that's not loaded in sugar and it's not going to create extra calories for me, I reach for a Built Bar. There's so many delicious flavors to choose from, and they rotate their flavor offerings. They have 9 basic flavors in nut-free variety, plus they rotate different flavors in every so many weeks over on their website over at BuiltBar.com. And when you head over to BuiltBar.com and use our special promo code LOCKED15, you will save 15% off your first order. So that's code LOCKED15, LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. Now, I want to ask you about some of these injured guys. David Ojabo, unfortunately, with the injury, he was probably going to be a first-round pick at some point. If you're the Giants, you've got 9 picks right now. Do you maybe take a flyer on him? I know a few years ago, it was a similar situation with Jalen Smith. The Cowboys took a flyer on him. They redshirted him for a year, came back, and if I'm not mistaken, I think he made a Pro Bowl for them before they eventually moved on from him. So if you're the Giants, do you think it's smart to take a risk on a guy, especially knowing that you have At linebacker, you still got Blake Martinez, you still got Tate Crowder, you got, Carter Coughlin, a few other guys that could kind of, hold down the fort until a guy like Ojabo can, step up and be healthy again?
I think so. Was it a specific linebacker you brought up? I think I missed that. Or are you just looking at linebacker in general?
Linebacker in general.
Yeah, linebacker in general, I think this is a really good linebacker class. It's not a position of high value, so I'm not like looking to push more than one or two guys into round one, but I feel really good about the day two depth. Brandon Smith of Penn State. I brought up Darian Beavers of Cincinnati, Channing Tindall, and Quay Walker, the two Georgia off-ball linebackers, in addition to Nakobe Dean, that I think could be day two type of players. Those are all, in my opinion, like impressive potential starters. Troy Anderson of Montana State is another one. Chad Muma of Wyoming. Like, you're getting guys on day two that I think can start in the NFL at that position. I think this is a good class to spend a round two, round three pick on an off-ball linebacker that can come in and start pretty early in his career.
We know, you've already said that the quarterback class is probably not the greatest one, but there's going to probably be a team or two that's going to grab a quarterback that, is quarterback needy and is going to grab a quarterback. So that being said, do you anticipate there's going to be some trade activity in that first round? And if so, who are the most likely candidates to want to move up? And could the Giants be in play as far as, being on the receiving end of a bounty?
I think there could be some interest in trading up if, say, Malik Willis does get past the Liberty quarterback, gets past Detroit at 2. You could start to see a team looking to jump ahead of the Carolina Panthers, who I do think are locking into one of Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett at 6 overall. They could even consider Matt Corral and Ole Miss an option there at number 6. So I do think that there could be teams, quarterback need teams, looking to trade up ahead of Carolina to go get their perspectives, their perspective QB1. But honestly, everyone I talk to continues to talk about just like the quarterback class in general. And while some have more projectable traits, the ceilings are lower, while some of them have the ceilings are higher, but they're nowhere near where they need to be. I don't think there are going to be a lot of teams looking to trade future first rounder, future second rounder type of picks to go up and get one of these quarterbacks. I think they're going to let the board fall to them. And if, the quarterback is is a good fit and they like him and they've evaluated him well, I think they're willing to spend a first rounder on one of these guys, but not necessarily multiple picks to get ahead of and get one.
Now, I don't know how much work you've done on 2023 yet, but based on what you do know of the class, is the 2023 quarterback class a lot better than this year's class?
I think it's early to say a lot better. I think I don't think it's early to say it will be better, just knowing how rough this quarterback class is. I think a lot of people are locking into Will Levis of Kentucky, CJ Stroud, Ohio State, and Bryce Young of Alabama as 3 legitimate quarterback prospects in 2023 that will be getting number 1 overall pick type of hype, right? None of the quarterbacks in this class are getting that level of hype, even with, obviously with the Jacksonville Jaguars having Trevor Lawrence, that's not going to happen. But I do think that Malik Willis could go 2, but I don't think he would go 2 in different classes, right? I think he'd be well behind Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, and Justin Fields from the previous draft class. It's more that because this draft class is so weak, teams are locking into a quarterback that maybe wouldn't even be a top of the first round type of player in other quarterback classes.
When we look at the top picks and for the Giants at 5 and 7, I mean, I'm of the opinion that don't get a guy who, say, for example, was strictly a college left tackle with the idea of putting him in at right tackle. Try to keep it as even keeled as possible. In other words, don't come up with a project. But that said, just going back to these tackles a bit, I think Evan Neal, if I'm not mistaken, was the only guy who played right tackle out of the batch, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was the one. Ike Ekwonu, I think, was left tackle. I think Charles Cross was left tackle. That all being said, I mean, if the Giants were to not get Evan Neal and they were to land up with Charles Cross or Ike Ekwonu, I mean, is the value, do they lose anything in the value? I mean, or are we talking a relatively easy switch for them?
I don't think it's significant value lost, right? I think all 3 of those guys you named are legitimate top 5, top 10 type of players, right? And it kind of depends on the flavor that you're looking for. Ike Ekwonu, I think, is the best run blocker of the bunch. I think Charles Cross is the best pass protector. I think Evan Neal is the best combination of both, right? And I think that's why a lot of teams, I think, will have Evan Neal as their number 1 tackle, but a lot of teams will also buy into the development of Ike Ekwonu at NC State, who is a legitimate road grader, that his feet and pass protection have improved so much that you're willing to kind of buy into this upward trajectory. So I don't think it's not necessarily a situation where if this player is not on the board, they should pass on offensive tackle altogether. I think one of those 3 will be available to them at 5 and 7. And I think that's where they start to consider it for sure.
Who's the most complete player, regardless of position, in this draft?
I think it's Aiden Hutchinson. I think Aiden Hutchinson, the Michigan defensive end, is easily the most complete player in this class. And while there are others that should be in consideration for number one overall, Kayvon Thibodeau of Oregon, I think you can definitely consider one of the offensive tackles that I mentioned. I do think that completeness will be something that teams covet at the top end of the draft. And I don't think he gets really past the Houston Texans or even the Detroit Lions at number two overall. Say Jacksonville does pass on Aiden Hutchinson. I think it's because he checks all the boxes, right? Athleticism, production, size, character, effort, motor, all these things that teams look for in a player on and off the field. Aiden Hutchinson has, right? And is he Myles Garrett levels of size, weight, height, weight, speed combination? Probably not, but he is an uber productive player in the Big Ten that has been the best player on the field at times in games, in big games like Ohio State, Iowa, the Big Ten championship, etc.
Every year, the NFL throws us a curveball. There's something that pops up in the draft that nobody saw coming.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's kind of hard to predict that, but if you had to take a guess as to where there might be a curveball coming, something that a team does that makes you say, "Oh my God, what are they thinking?" or "Wow, didn't see that coming." Whereabouts in the first round of the draft do you think might be the spot we look at, and how would that affect the rest of the draft?
I think a big shock would be Malik Willis to the Lions at 2. Like, I don't think a lot of people are talking about that. I think a big shock would be there. And then Carolina Panthers going Kenny Pickett at 6, right? And then Desmond Ridder going inside the top 20, say to the Saints at 18. Maybe the Falcons investing in a quarterback at 8. Like, as bad as this quarterback class is, and as much as everyone has kind of thrown shade at it, I think there's the shock the NFL could show us is that, hey, we're still drafting these guys in the top 10 because it's such a valuable position right now. Would I draft Kenny Pickett inside the top 10? I also would be super interested in drafting Malik Willis in the top 10. I think there's a lot of reason to look ahead to the 2023 quarterback class, depending on where you are as a team, as you continue to develop, right? And I think unless your ownership is willing to see these selections as taking a swing of the bat at the quarterback position and not a wholesale franchise altering investment, that's the only situation. Like, if Detroit's saying, if you take Malik Willis, we're committing him in 4 years, I'm scared. If they say you take Malik Willis, but you like another quarterback in 2023, we'll take that bat too, similar to what the Cardinals did, right, with Josh Rosen and Kyler Murray, then I'm more interested. I think it all comes back to ownership expectations. If ownership says the quarterback you take at 6 overall, Carolina, is your mate, your ride or die, and if you don't win here, you're getting fired, all that stuff, I probably don't take a quarterback at 6 because I don't think there are quarterbacks in this class where I want to stake my reputation on, right, and developing and building an offense around all that.
All right, final question for you, Austin. Given the depth of this draft across the board, if you're the Giants, ideally now fans want the Giants to pick a player at 5 and at 7. But if you're the Giants, do you say, okay, you know what? This class is so deep in positions that I need. I'm going to make a trade. I'm going to trade one of those top 2 picks. So what would you think would be an acceptable trade down? I mean, and obviously we got to pick a partner and we can look at the quarterback needy teams, but what would a good package look like? Would it be all picks from this year? Would it be a combination of picks from this year and next year? And if you're the Giants, would you do it if the opportunity were there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a team like if Atlanta really likes Malik Willis and they see him falling and they want to get him before the Panthers take him at 6, I think them going from 5 to 8, right, could be worth a third, maybe a second if other teams are bidding to come up in this year's draft or next year's draft. I think teams outside of that, say like Pittsburgh wants to come up, that's a different story. You still have a top 10 pick, but Pittsburgh wants to go from 20 to 5 or 20 to 7 to go get Malik Willis. I think then you're picking up future first rounders and future second rounders, right? You're going and getting legitimate capital to move down 15 slots.
Does it make sense, though, for the Giants to do something?
I think so. If they're not going to take, I always view if your team drafting in the top 10, receiving an offer for a team to trade it for a quarterback, and you're not going to take that QB, you should take it, right? Like, quarterback is such a valuable position in the NFL that, if you're going to receive trade offers, say additional first, additional second rounders to go back in the draft and still maintain a top 10 pick like the Giants would in this case, I think it's a no-brainer for a team that's actively looking to add talent to the roster, right? They're not looking to make an upgrade at quarterback. Now, if the Giants were in a different situation and were considering Malik Willis or considering a quarterback at that spot, then I think it's not as big of a no-brainer for a team to trade down.
And plus also, if the Giants can pick up future draft picks,
yes,
we don't know what's going to happen with Daniel Jones. I mean, all indications are health-wise he should be fine, but guy hasn't really taken the step that, I think everybody thought he would have taken by now.
I agree wholesale.
And I don't know if he's going to. I mean, they're optimistic. They feel that, put a stable offensive line in front of him, good scheme, give him some consistency. But you know what? He's kind of what we've seen so far from him, I think, in the pros is what we saw from him at Duke. I mean, can a leopard change its spots just because he's got a new system now?
Yeah, no, I don't think so necessarily. I think Daniel Jones, his peak in the NFL, I think we've kind of already seen. I think we know what Daniel Jones is. Now, I think there are a lot of reasons to create excuses around why he hasn't developed and maybe why you want to buy more time with Daniel Jones. But honestly, I think when it's all said and done, we're going to be looking at that selection as a bust of a pick, and honestly one that set the franchise back multiple years.
Wow. That's not what Giant fans want to hear. I mean, when it's funny when they took Daniel at 6, I thought maybe they would take him at 17 that year. I was surprised that they took him at 6. I thought they were going to go with the pass rusher. Josh Allen, I think, was the pass rusher at the time, and I like Daniel, but I think they overdrafted him personally. I mean, I don't know if
Yeah,
you
I'm
agree
with
or
you.
not, but hopefully this year he steps up. Otherwise, it's going to be another long year for Giant fans. But hey, listen, the draft's always exciting. Pro Football Focus is going to have so much more on the drafts, probably more mock drafts. I would assume player grades. I'm sure you're updating stuff as these pro days take place.
Mhm.
So Austin, looking forward to seeing what you guys have, and of course you have that series. Tell everybody about that series, that on Hutch, the podcast series, what that's about, and just kind of give them a little sneak peek.
Yeah, so we're working with Aiden Hutchinson, our director of communications. David Sofaro has done a massive job. He's a graduate from University of Michigan, has helped us with a lot of the ties there to put together a podcast on Aiden Hutchinson, right? Tell his story the best we possibly can. We got his family involved, him involved. It's going to be roughly 6 hours of content on the number one overall pick. We think. I do think that it's going to be an interesting. It's going to shed a lot of light on the story that is Aiden Hutchinson and just the effort that's gone into him being one of the most productive players in the country.
All right, and that's something that even if Hutchinson doesn't land up with the Giants, which he probably won't, still
Mm-hmm.
something to take to give a listen to. That should be a lot of fun and a lot of interesting stuff, especially to get beyond the helmet. I personally love those series when you can get beyond, underneath the helmet and to the person that wears the helmet. It's always
Absolutely.
telling. So, all right, Austin, really appreciate you coming on and talking giraffe with us. Again, folks, you can find him on Pro Football Focus, PFF.com. They've got plenty of free stuff. They also have subscription products, which a lot of us in the industry, including myself, we use their stats and their raw data and whatnot. And right now, I'm looking at the site right now. There's a special promo code, Free Agency 30, for 30% off any Pro Football Focus subscription. So if you have thought about getting a subscription, now you have a reason to do it. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us here on the LockedOn Giants podcast. Now, for tomorrow, we're going to have a recap of the opening of the Giants off-season conditioning program, which is actually today, Monday, April 4th. So we'll have a few thoughts on that, on some of the things that were said. We're going to move Twitter Tuesday to Thursday, so you have plenty of time still to get your questions into me. And all the information on how to contact me is in the show notes if you want to get in touch with me. And on Wednesday, we're going to have Eric Crocker on the show. Eric Crocker is one of the co-hosts here at the Locked On Network. He is co-host of Locked On NFL Draft. He is also co-host of Locked On 49ers, a former NFL defensive back. Crocky had some really, really good scoops and observations on some of the draft prospects that have been linked to the Giants. So we'll have that show for you on Wednesday. Then again, we'll have Twitter Thursday, like I said, and then we'll see what I come up with for you on Friday. So hope you will tune in. Thank you again for watching or listening, and we will catch you tomorrow.